2025 has been a pretty big year for Darktide. We got a lot of interesting content added to the game, and a lot of fixes that needed to happen were implemented. Today, I wanted to review everything that released this year, give my honest takes, and then talk about what I think Darktide needs in 2026. If you don't recall, at the beginning of the year, we got the Nightmares and Visions update, which basically introduced Mortis Trials and a new Havoc campaign, or effectively Havoc 2.0 and the Ogryn rework. Mortis Trials is an interesting game mode because I feel like it did a good job of introducing different narrative elements and a backstory for a lot of the characters that we know and love in the game, such as Zola, Marrow, Rannick, and Brams. But I feel like the game mode itself really misses the mark. It just plays too slowly, it's a little boring, and it's really a shadow of what Chaos Wastes was in Vermintide. Next up, the Havoc update that we got with this patch is actually really good. It's made Havoc a really fun game mode. Probably one of the most fun and most intense game modes that Foundshark has ever made. It's a really good example of what an endgame should look like in a co-op game like this, but what I would say is that it's still extremely inaccessible. New players find it really difficult to find groups because players don't want to lose Havoc runs because they don't want to risk D-ranking. So as a result, the Havoc community has become a little toxic towards new players or towards players who are just trying to farm for the penances. A really easy but perhaps boring way to fix this problem would basically just be to remove D-ranking from Havoc overall, but I don't think that this would be good for the game mode, specifically because D-ranking introduces stakes that make the game mode exciting. Instead, I would like to see the implementation of two things: matchmaking and matchmaking rating, or MMR. Introducing an MMR system would of course mean that Havoc would probably need to be rebalanced from the ground up, but I think that it would be worth it in the end. Lastly, the patch introduced the Ogryn rework, which I felt like really needed to happen because the Ogryn was balanced around the base game rather than being balanced around Havoc, which represented a massive increase in difficulty and challenge. In my opinion, this was the biggest W of the Nightmares and Visions patch, and that momentum would roll forward into June when we got the Battle for Tertium update and the introduction of the Arbites. The Arbitrator was the first class added to Darktide since the release of the game, and it was a pretty massive success. The class makes sense for a game like this. It introduces an interesting playstyle in the form of having a pet in this kind of game. It's thematic enough to market to the masses, and Arbitrators just go hand in hand with Inquisitors and Rogue Traders. The Battle for Tertium also introduced an update to the new player journey, or what you would call a campaign to the game. This is pretty crucial because this provides a narrative vehicle for the developers to introduce more stories to us in the future. This goes a really long way in improving the overall immersion of the game. These missions and maps don't just all exist in a vacuum, they now exist in a narrative and a story that introduces players to the planet and the setting overall. But the new class goodies didn't just stop with the Battle for Tertium update, because in the Bound by Duty update introduced in the fall, we also got class reworks for the Zealot, Veteran, and Psyker. These were important because these three classes had fallen behind both the Arbitrator and the Ogryn in Havoc 2.0. Bound by Duty also introduced the new enemy of the year, which is the Scab Plasma Gunner, and it also introduced the Power Falchion, which is a new power weapon for the Veteran, and it basically works exactly like the Relic Blade in that you activate its power stance or power mode in order to be able to do more damage and cleave through more targets. Though I do believe that the Power Falchion is having a little bit of an identity crisis, as it does not perform as well as the Relic Blade on the Zealot at all. In fact, I think that the Power Sword does everything the Power Falchion does, but better. And the Scab Plasma Gunner is fine. It's always great seeing more enemies get added to the game. It's just not that interesting, and we'll talk about that later. The last major update of the year is actually a string of updates tied to the 10 years of Tide anniversary. The 10 years of Tide covers the Stolen Rations event, the No Man's Land operation, and and the new Hive Scum class. It's not flashy, but the Stolen Rations event was actually implemented quite well. It created a sense of competition in the community, and I feel like it's the only event in the history of Vermintide and Darktide that has been able to do that. Next up, the No Man's Land operation is something that everybody just needs to experience on their own, especially if you're a huge Astra Militarum fan. There's something about brutal trench warfare that just awakens something within me. And last but not least, the update introduces the Hive Scum. I really like the way that the Hive Scum plays, especially with one of its abilities, Desperado, which basically just makes it feel like you're playing a Necromunda hired gun. The new weapons play and feel great, but my number one point of contention with the entire Hive Scum class is that it does not appeal to me. I feel like Necromunda fans and Warhammer 40k fans exist in two different universes. I don't really care for a setting that you can say is basically a mishmash of Mad Max and Cyberpunk. And by extension, I don't really care for characters that are inspired from that setting. And that's not to say that the designers, writers, developers, and voice actors did a bad job. They did a fantastic job, but it just doesn't click with me. And the class kind of summarizes how I feel about 2025 in general. Darktide has received a lot of necessary updates that have made the game better, but it hasn't really received many interesting updates. Right now, Darktide kind of feels like it's a Camaro because it's ugly on the outside, not that interesting, but on the inside, under the hood, it works really, really well. There are some quirks, but it outcompetes all of its competitors. And moving forward, I would expect less updates to Darktide's supporting systems and more content additions to the game. And I don't feel any sense of entitlement when I say that I expect more content to be added to the game because more monetization structures have been added to the game. Nowadays, when a player is getting into Darktide, not only do they have to buy the base game, but they also have to buy each of the classes if they want to experience all the content that the game has to offer. And this wouldn't necessarily be a problem for me if the game was just solely funded by its DLCs, but it's also funded by the microtransaction store, the Commodore's Vestures, which have been expanded upon since the game was released. If you've been watching the channel for a while, then you know that I typically prefer to wear cosmetics that I earn through tough gameplay challenges, achievements, and in Darktide's case, penances. But the last good wave of earnable armor sets released for the game was with Havoc, which was a year ago at this point. I'd really like to see the ability to unlock Aquillas consistently by playing the game, or I want other tangible items that are worth chasing to be added to the penance track or to be added to more penances in general. A really fun armor set to add to the game and something that would be a really good long-term chase would be an armor set where each piece costs 10 million Ordo Dockets. This would be a really good idea that would expand on a system and a currency that a lot of the long-time players in the community just aren't engaging with anymore. But to return to my original point, because Darktide is being so overtly monetized and it's presumably making more money now than it ever has before, I expect more content than ever before. Vermintide 2 got 3 new maps this year, 4 if you count the map that was introduced with the special event that happened in September. In 2025, Darktide will have received a new Mortis Trials map, which is a game mode that not many people engage with, and a new operation in the form of No Man's Land, which is phenomenal. But what I'm afraid of is that Darktide continues to become even more monetized as it matures, and it progresses down this path where it becomes a minimum viable product because the quality of the updates becomes less and less substantial over time. And this is going to become very evident in 2026 as we get more classes, as the game is simply going to become more expensive. Thus, I feel like 2026 is Darktide's most pivotal year in its development because it's going to need to pump more weapons, more maps, new tangible content that we can all interact with, more Havoc mutators, innovations to Havoc in general, a Mortis Trials rework, more interesting enemies such as Gene Stealer cults or Chaos Demons, things that are going to remind the community that it's really getting a lot of value for all of its money and time invested in the game. The last thing that I want is for players to be dissatisfied dissatisfied with Darktide overall, and for them to leave the game because they feel like they're being nickeled and dimed every time they log in. But with all that being said, as someone who has spoken directly to the design director of the game, I feel pretty confident and optimistic about the future of this game. And speaking of the future, I wanted to provide a channel update for those of you who have stuck around this long in the video. First of all, I want you to know that I really appreciate your support and your viewership. As always, those are always going to be enough for me. I would never ask for anything more. If you're the kind of person who wants to show more support, I do have memberships enabled on the channel for $1, the minimum that you can possibly have memberships set for. But please don't expect more than the channel icon and emotes and possibly more attention in the comment section from me, as I feel pretty dirty with selling members-only videos or early access for members to videos or things like members-only streams. I experimented with some of that stuff in the past and I'm just not a fan of it. Additionally, if you ever want to hang out, I do live stream on twitch.tv/Jeffficus and here on YouTube as well. Otherwise, you can get a hold of me through my Twitter or in my Discord server, which will both be linked in the description. Again, thank you guys. I really appreciate your viewership. As always, this has been Jeffficus, and I'll see you in-game. The Emperor protects.